welcome to the ENVIROlocity interview series. This is where we are talking to industry professionals from various careers, different backgrounds, and helping you to determine what maybe you could do with your career and what does it actually look like to work in those professions. So today we're speaking to Mark Hafen. Thank you for being here.
I'm here.
And we are going to be posting this to YouTube once it's over. So if you're missing this, you'll be able to find it on YouTube, and you can find the entire list of previous interviews there as well. And so let's just jump right in. So Mark, if you could first just tell us a little bit about your role, what you do, starting with what your title is.
Okay. I am the program director for the Master of Urban and Regional Planning program here at the University of South Florida. My role is both administrative in that I oversee the program, advising of students, curriculum changes, and as we were discussing earlier, the accreditation process. I also teach in the program. Primarily, I teach some courses in the core, such as land use planning and economic development planning, but I also teach environmental electives, urban environmental policy, planning in coastal communities, and principles of environmental planning. So those are my primary roles right now.
Great. Those sound like really interesting courses. How long have you been doing that?
Okay, well, I've been in this particular position since fall of 2014. Prior to that, I was in what is now the School of Geosciences, and I taught in the environmental science and policy and geography programs. And for 8 years, I was the program director for the bachelor's degree in geography. And that's been since 2001.
All right. So did you always know that you wanted to do something with the environment?
I knew. You know, got to remember when I grew up. Okay. And so I went to college in 1976, and I was going to be an accountant. And so I entered Penn State University in 1976, started off as an accounting major, till I got to intermediate financial accounting, realized that that was not where I wanted to go, and changed my major to business logistics, which is now called supply chain management. During that time, I really didn't take any classes that would we would consider environmental at all. You know, first of all, as a business major, you know, the science classes I had to take were pretty wimpy. And so I really didn't take anything like that. But after 9 years of jobs in, you know, for really big companies, you know, I really figured out that that's not where I belonged. And so I quit and I went back and got my master's degree and in geography. And while in that program, I started to get a sense of sort of human environment interactions and the impact that humans have on the environment. And what ended up happening is my master's thesis was on lead in soils adjacent to the major interstate highway that goes through Tampa, which is on Interstate 275. And so I collected soil samples from along the highway and tested them for lead and found that there was all this lead in the soils in certain areas along the highway, which was an environmental problem in that you know, there are neighborhoods that butt right up against the right of way for the highway. And so that dust can blow into yards, and, you know, kids eat dirt, and can very easily ingest lead. And you know, lead, environmental lead is a huge environmental health problem, especially for children. Causes all sorts of issues with development and renal failure and all kinds of things like that. And most people think about the lead that's in the house, lead-based paints, but this was, you know, lead out in the environment that was, you know, possibly affecting children. And so that's, you know, it was kind of my first introduction to sort of the environment. While I was finishing my master's, I got hired by a small land use planning consulting firm, and we did a lot of studies that looked at we had to assess for projects such as transmission lines and power plant sightings and transportation projects that we paired on, you know, looking at things like, okay, where are the wetlands? Where are the environmentally sensitive lands? You know, where's agriculture? Where are, you know, protected areas? Where are, you know, and we generally didn't have to do the studies that look for threatened species, but, you know, we were part of those studies as well. And so I got to do a lot of that, which, you know, again, further cemented what I was sort of coming to realize was my calling. And during that time, I also started teaching at what was then St. Pete Junior College, which is now St. Petersburg College, teaching earth science. And, you know, that led me to want to pursue my PhD. So what the heck, with a bachelor's in business and a master's in geography, what's the next logical step? PhD in marine science. So that's where I went. And that worked out really well. Got to learn some awesome stuff. Got to learn an awful lot about the West Florida coastal environment. And, you know, from there, ended up in my first teaching role, first faculty role here at USF back in 2001 in the environmental science and policy program. So I ended up teaching classes like that, environmental science, you know, physical geography, all sorts of things like that. So roundabout way, you know, I didn't really know I wanted to be something environmental. I became more environmentally aware, more aware of how humans and the environment interacted. And then through my time as a faculty member here at USF, you know, I've just become more, you know, teaching classes and being involved with the region and, you know, looking at human environment interactions, and it's just kind of become my passion.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. I also did not start with an interest in environment, and I took actually at SPC, I took science for non-majors, and I didn't pass.
Yep.
And that was when it was still a junior college as well. So yeah, I had to backtrack a little bit myself, but you talked about finding your calling. So obviously some of it was exploration. So you were out doing the different jobs and learning things. I think a lot of people now, because of how much attention environmental issues and climate change is bringing to the surface, are discovering sooner than we might have in the past that we should be more connected with the environment and want to be involved. But a lot of people are struggling with, what do I do with that? I want to make a difference, but I don't know where I fit or how. Like, do you have any insight into what that finding your calling, as you put it, kind of means, or what that looks like?
Sure. You can make really effective change with regard to human environment interactions without being a scientist, okay, without being, you know, someone that's doing that kind of research. You know, my role really, the way I look at it, is someone who translates the science into policy. And, you know, so different disciplines and different areas of employment, one of the things that's happening is this idea of sort of sustainability and resilience, and particularly with regard to urban areas, is becoming much more important in these disciplines. And so having any kind of background in the environment, in addition to training in these sorts of disciplines, you know, like public administration or urban planning, you know, allows you to be involved in both. You know, and urban planning is not all about the environment. There's some real nuts and bolts things like zoning and land development codes and all that other kind of stuff that really don't have a lot to do with the environment, but all of it's framed within that. And, you know, one of the big drivers that we are dealing with right now are the impacts of climate change, and particularly in coastal cities. And so you can't do any kind of urban planning, for example, in a coastal city without thinking about things like, you know, rainfall patterns and sea level rise and, you know, urban heat islands and all these sorts of things that are being impacted by this sort of larger forcing. And, there are a variety of different things like that act on it, but from an environmental standpoint, that's really one of them. And so cities and counties, even our state, have hired sustainability officers. Again, people who are there to sort of help guide the process and translate the science into effective policy.
Excellent. So in speaking of that sort of regional planning programs, what does, from the academic standpoint, how are you involved with that, and who else do you work with?
Well, the Tampa Bay region has a climate science advisory panel, and I'm one of the original members of that. And this is a group of scientists, but also policymakers who advise local governments on the latest science with regard to things like climate change and sea level rise, and changes in rainfall patterns, which we've noticed here in the Tampa Bay region, things like that, to help those governments plan. I'm heavily involved with, I keep getting asked to be involved with a lot of things, different cities and counties. The state, for example, passed in 2015 something called the Parallel Flood Act. And what it did was it mandated that every city, coastal city and county do a vulnerability assessment, and then create changes to their comprehensive plan, which is the main planning document that they all use, to how they're going to address these flooding issues. They had to look at scenarios. And so I've been helping Manatee County and Hillsborough County and various cities, City of Dunedin, et cetera, with their compliance with the Parallel Flood Act. And so that's been really good, and it's been great for my students because they've all been involved with it as well. They've actually done some of the work, and probably our crowning achievement was the City of Dunedin. My students in my land use planning class wrote the comprehensive plan amendments for the city, presented them for the city commission, they adopted them, and they are currently being folded into their comprehensive plan. So it was a really great experience for the students, and it was a great experience for me to actually help them develop something of professional caliber like that.
Well, that's really cool. I actually grew up in Dunedin, so I love that.
Oh, okay. Well, Dunedin is a very progressive city. They are out on the front end of all this stuff, and they were just phenomenal to work with.
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up. Not a whole lot of park area though, so I didn't spend, I lived in a very built environment. We have parks obviously, but nothing like when I moved to Hillsborough County and saw the eastern half of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Lots of big wide open spaces in eastern Hillsborough County.
Yeah, I had no idea. So another question I get a lot is obviously has to do with if I can't get a job, people start to get freaked out, and then they're like, maybe I should go back to school, and they kind of panic. And having run the gamut yourself through all the courses and different career paths and changed your mind a couple of times, like what kind of advice, I'm sure you get this from students as well, like what kind of advice do you give for students who are not sure whether that's right for them?
Yeah. Well, in my case, I kept following my passion. The things that it's like, that just hit me. It's like, nah, this is what I want to do. And the obstacles may seem daunting, but, it all worked out for me. I didn't go into, crippling debt or anything like that. Everything kind of worked out as necessary. And it's because I was pursuing the things that I knew I needed to do. I'll have to say, as an old geezer, back in my day, a high school education was enough to get you a good job, particularly in manufacturing, things like that. Well, our whole economy has changed since then. And the conventional wisdom now is that a bachelor's degree from college is about the equivalent of a high school degree, back in my day, which is unfortunate because a college degree, I think, is really important, and not everybody gets to pursue a college degree. And so you're basically telling people that, well, if you don't have a college degree, it's like not having a high school diploma, and that's not really fair. I mean, not everybody needs to or wants to go to college. But there are certain areas where you're not going to get the knowledge that you need unless you are going to go to school. And I would say to students who or people who have bachelor's degrees but haven't really been able to find a job in the discipline is think about graduate school. Graduate degrees are much more focused. There's no general education classes that you have to take. You can usually complete them in a much shorter period of time. You can complete them while you're working some job that you're not really sure that you want to do, but because you can do it part-time. If you're pretty highly qualified, it's likely that you will get funded, and getting funded in graduate school is like really critical. If you can become a full-time student and get funded, basically what that means is that you get paid a stipend and you get a tuition waiver, which covers a large portion of your tuition and fees. So, those are the kind of opportunities to look for. Not every program will offer to fund you, but apply to multiple programs and find one that will fund you. But that allows you, a graduate degree really just gives you credentials that a lot of people don't have. And, master's degrees are, like I said, they're very focused. And you can really hone in on the areas that you're most interested in, most passionate about in pursuing in a professional career. I can't tell you how rewarding it is, both for myself, having gotten to do what I've gotten to do because I've gone to graduate school, but watching my students go out into the workforce, and the vast majority of them stay in the discipline because they just love what they're doing. They're making a difference, and being able to make a difference, that you go home at night, no matter how exhausted you are, it's like, I did something good today,
Great.
So.
That's great. And I love how enthusiastic you are about it still. And
Still.
every day. It's so easy. I think, it's more common for people to only stay in a job for a couple of years now. And it's so easy to get like, okay, I did this. Now what can I do next? So can you talk a little bit about why did you stay in academia rather than going back out and after your PhD and going back to work for a private company?
Yeah. Well, corporate America was definitely not where I belonged. Even though I worked for two big companies, and I did okay there, it was just not for me. I don't know whether it was my blue collar upbringing or whatever it was, but, fitting into that sort of corporate lifestyle just never quite fit for me. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to stay in academia either. Once I finished my master's degree and once I was, working in consulting, and I loved my consulting job, I really did. The stuff that I was doing was really fun until the very last project that I got to work on, and then I was like, "Ooh, I don't think I want to do this." But it was all along. While I was in my master's program, I was a teaching assistant. And so I got to teach some labs and some classes like that. And that was the bug. That was the bug. It said, I really want to teach. And so, that's when I applied to go teach at St. Pete College. I was just going to teach one class and see how it went. And it was like, okay, this is it. And I realized that if I wanted to do this full time, I needed a doctorate, because even the junior colleges were hiring people with PhDs rather than just with master's degrees. Now they'll hire you as an adjunct, to teach one class, here and there as with a master's degree, but a full-time faculty member, you need a PhD. And so that did it for me. I knew kind of in the back of my head that I kind of wanted to teach. I remember in 6th grade, I wanted to be a math teacher, probably because my 6th grade teacher was a math teacher, and I really liked him. And I think that stuck in my head, probably all the while I was pursuing all these other, professions. And so once I taught one semester at the college, it was like, yep, this is it. This is what I want to do.
That's awesome. All right, well, believe it or not, we're coming up on 20 minutes already. So
Oh,
is there anything that you would like to talk about or advice you want to give that I didn't ask you a question about?
I guess what my advice would be to ask a lot of questions. You know, anybody who is passionate about pursuing an environmental career, you know, needs to ask questions about where can I be most effective and impactful. And, you know, what are the things I like to do? You know, that's, you know, so you ask the questions of yourself, and then you start asking questions of your resources. You know, here at USF, you can pursue a variety of degrees that are environmentally related. You know, so what you have to do is ask a lot of questions about, okay, what do you study in this program? What do your students do during their studies? What do they do afterwards? What kind of jobs do they get afterwards? Do any of these things fit with me? You know, because there's not just like one place to go do this sort of thing. You know, there are multiple places. And even if you're not pursuing graduate education, even if you're pursuing, you know, just employment, you've got to ask questions. And a lot of people go into interviews afraid to ask questions. And you have to remember that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. You know, I'll admit I was offered a full-time tenure-track faculty position at a university up in New York City, and I turned it down because it was not the right position for me. Just knew it, you know, and there was no way if I had taken that position that I would have been happy. You know, it just, you know, and it is okay to turn down a job that is not going to make you fulfill, is not going to fulfill you, you know. You get a vibe when you go to a place. You can tell whether people are happy or not happy, you know, what the working environment's like, what kind of constraints you're going to be working under. You know, some places are real loose, some places are real, you know, conforming, and you have to decide what's going to be right for you. You know, some people are perfectly content to go to a job that's just, because they get paid really well. You know, other people are like, I don't care what I get paid, I want to do what makes me happy. You know, and you've got to find where you are on that spectrum, and, you know, and do the things that you want. Don't be afraid to take some time to do that either. You know, it's easy to panic when, you know, you haven't found the right job, and maybe you've graduated, and it's like, okay, I'm still waiting tables at Chili's. You know, what am I going to do? But the right job will come along at the right time. It always does.
Awesome. That's great advice. I always say the same thing. You've got to be interviewing them as well. The interview process is very telling.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've gone into interviews where, you know, I was like, oh, yeah, I don't think I'm going to give this one my best effort, because I can already tell that this is not a place that's going to work for me. You know, now I haven't had to do much of that in the last 20 years, but certainly prior to that, that happened. And, you know, you can tell, you know, listen to your gut, you know, listen to your gut, because that'll tell you everything.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't, you know, honestly, besides the way that you apply, you know, online versus in person and on paper, other than that, I think the interview process itself hasn't changed very much. You know, they expect you to walk in the door and be nice to the person behind the desk, but, you know, if they haven't put a lot of effort in treating you well as their interviewee, then that's very telling also.
Oh,
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
great advice, all great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And if you have any links or helpful things or just programs that you're working on or anything that you want to include in the description for this, just let me know and we'll provide that. And so this will be up on YouTube, and we'll have links. Mark, are you good with anybody connecting with you on LinkedIn if they have a question or want to ask you about academia?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah. And I'll
Awesome.
I'll also provide you a link to my graduate degree program, the Master of Urban and Regional Planning. There's lots of information about the degree program there, and they can contact me through that page too.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thank you so much again for being here and interviewing today. And I look forward to staying in touch in the future.
All right. My pleasure, Laura.
All right. Thanks.